Now, why should you listen to me talk about these important matters in your life? Well, I've not only got all the training to understand the legal and tax issues, but I've got a real passion for this kind of work. On the screen, you'll see a summary of my academic and legal background. Our firm has been located in the historic Behringer Studios building for over 22 years. As an estate planning firm, we have served as a source of information on estate planning for many of the major media outlets. And I'm also proud to say that we consistently earn a 5-star rating on most of the major social media outlets. There are considerations to determine whether your loved one's estate will need to go through probate or trust administration. Number one, if the deceased person did not have a will or trust, you will have to begin the probate court process. And number two, if the deceased person had only a will, you will have to begin the probate court process. If the deceased person had a trust, you can avoid the probate court process altogether. There is a lot to go through here. Number one, you have to cope with the loss of a loved one while continuing to manage your own life, career, and family. And also, you have to consider how you're going to navigate this complex and confusing administrative process. Closing out a lifetime of paperwork for someone is a difficult thing. When people die, they leave behind a life that must be closed out. Their funeral must be planned, their bank accounts closed, their pets rehomed, and their final bills paid. When someone you love dies, the job of handling those personal and legal details may fall to you. It's a stressful, bureaucratic task that can take a year or more to complete, all while you're grieving the loss. The amount of paperwork can take survivors by surprise. You really can't do it alone. Settling a deceased family member's affairs is not a one-person task. You'll need the help of others, ranging from professionals like lawyers or CPAs who can advise you on financial matters, to a network of friends and relatives to whom you can delegate tasks or lean on for emotional support. As the administrator executor, you'll oversee the settling of the estate and spend months and sometimes even years dealing with paperwork. To marshal the right help, you'll need a checklist of all the things that need to be done, ranging from writing thank you notes for flowers sent to the funeral to seeing a will all the way through probate. Now, there are certain things that you want to do right after someone dies. One, you'll want to get a legal pronouncement of death. That will require, of course, that you then get the death certificate. If your loved one died in a hospital or nursing home where a doctor was present, the staff will handle this. An official declaration of death is the first step to getting the death certificate, which is a critical piece of paperwork in probate. But if your relative died at home, especially if it was unexpected, you'll need to get a medical professional to declare him or her dead. To do this, call 911 soon after your loved one passes and have them transported to an emergency room where they can be declared dead and moved to a funeral home. If your family member died at home under hospice care, a hospice nurse can declare them dead. Without a declaration of death, you can't plan a funeral, much less handle the deceased person's legal affairs. Next thing you'll want to do is tell friends and family. You'll want to send out possibly a group text or mass email or make individual phone calls to let people know that this loved one has passed. To track down all those who need to know, go through the deceased emails and phone contacts. You'll want to inform co-workers and the members of any social groups or churches to which the person belonged. You'll want to ask the recipients to spread the word by notifying others connected to the deceased. Put a post about the death on social media. You will also want to find out about any existing funeral or burial plans which the deceased may have had. Hopefully you are able to talk with your loved one about his or her wishes for funeral or burial or cremation. If not, look for a letter of instruction in the deceased person's papers. You might also want to call a family meeting to decide on the next steps to take regarding funeral planning. You will want to contact the Social Security Administration. There may be a death benefit that beneficiaries are entitled to. In addition, the person's Social Security number should be placed on a master death list, preventing identity thieves from using it. What should you do within the next few days after death? Well, you'll have to make funeral and burial or cremation arrangements. You'll want to search the paperwork to find out if there was a prepaid burial plan. If not, you'll need to choose a funeral home and decide on specifics like where the service will be held, or whether to cremate, where the body or ashes will be interred, and what type of tombstone or urn to order. It's a good idea to research funeral prices to help you make informed decisions. Arranging for the body to be transported is another issue. If there's no autopsy required, the body can be picked up by a funeral home, mortuary, or crematorium. If the person was in the military or belonged to a fraternal or religious group, contact the Veterans Administration or the specific organization to see if it offers burial benefits or conducts funeral services. You'll want to get help with the funeral. Line up relatives and friends to be pallbearers, to eulogize, to plan the funeral, to keep a list of well-wishers, to write thank you notes, and to arrange the post-funeral gathering. You'll want to get a friend or relative who is a wordsmith to write the obituary. You'll want to make sure that the decedent's property is secured. You'll want to lock up his or her home and vehicle. You'll want to ask a friend or relative to order the plants, get the mail, and throw out the food in the refrigerator. If there are valuables such as jewelry or cash in the home, lock them up. You'll have to watch out for valuable personal effects walking out. You'll want to provide care for the pets. Make sure that the pets have caretakers until there's a permanent plan for them. Send them to stay with a relative who likes animals or board them at a kennel. You'll want to forward the mail of the deceased person, so you'll want to go to the post office and put in a forwarding order to send the mail to yourself or whoever is working with you to see to the immediate affairs of the decedent. You don't want mail piling up at the decedent's home. You don't want to telegraph to the world that the property is empty. This is also the first step in finding out what subscriptions, creditors, and other accounts will need to be canceled or paid. A person's mail is a wealth of information and will help you to see what the person's assets and bills are. It will help you find out what you need to take care of. You'll want to notify the deceased person's employer. You'll want to ask for information about benefits and any paychecks that may be due. You'll also want to inquire about whether there's a company-wide life insurance policy. Now, one of the things that you will want to do is within the 2 weeks after death is to secure certified copies of death certificates. I always suggest at least 10 copies because it's better to have too many than too little. You're going to need death certificates to close bank and brokerage accounts, to file insurance claims, and to register the death with government agencies, among other things. The funeral home you're working with can get copies on your behalf, or you can order them from the Vital Statistics Office with the county in which the deceased person lived. You'll want to find the will and the executor, and your loved one's survivors need to know where any money, property, or belongings will go. Ideally, you will have wanted to talk with the relatives before the deceased passed away, and hopefully she will have told where the will was located. You'll want to look in a desk and safety deposit box or wherever important papers are kept. You'll want to make sure that the executor is named in the will. The executor needs to be involved in most of the steps going forward. If there isn't a will, the probate court judge will name an administrator in place of an executor. And it's important oftentimes to meet with a trust and estate attorney. Having an attorney to settle an estate makes things much easier. Diving into the handling of an estate without experience can create great anxiety. Since you don't have to pay the attorney any money to begin the process, and the attorney will usually only be seeking compensation from the estate's assets, it makes sense to hire a lawyer to help navigate the legal maze and will typically allow for quicker closure of the estate. The attorney's fees are regulated by state law, and you will not have any personal liability for the debts of the estate. You'll also want to contact the CPA perhaps, depending on the estate. If the person had a CPA, use that one, and if not, you'll want to hire one. The estate may have to file a tax return, and a final tax return will need to be filed on the decedent's behalf. Getting the taxes right is an important part of this process. You'll want to take the will to probate. Probate is the legal process of executing a will or estates without a will. Probate court makes sure that the person's debts and liabilities are paid and that the remaining assets are transferred to the beneficiaries. You'll want to make an inventory of all of the assets of the deceased person. The probate process usually starts with an inventory of all assets. That would be personal property, bank accounts, a house, car, brokerage account, personal property, furniture, jewelry, etc. All of that will be needed to make a record for the court. You'll want to track down any assets, and part of the work of making an inventory of assets is finding them. That's called marshaling the assets. You'll want to comb your family's tax returns, mail, email, brokerage, and bank accounts, deeds, and titles to find assets. Don't leave any safe deposit box or filing cabinet unopened. In some instances, you may want to hire an investigator to make sure that all assets have been located. Make a list of bills. It will be very important that all expenses such as the mortgage, taxes, credit cards, government benefits, debts, and utilities are taken care of while the estate is settled. You'll want to cancel services which are no longer needed. These include cell phones, iTunes, Netflix, cable, internet. All of those things need to be canceled. Now, 2 weeks after death, you'll want to cancel the driver's license. This removes the deceased name from the records of the Department of Motor Vehicles and prevents identity theft. You'll want to contact the local DMV for specific instructions, but you'll need a copy of the death certificate. You'll want to close credit card accounts. You'll want to contact customer service and tell the representatives of the various stores that you're closing the account on behalf of a deceased relative. You'll need to provide a copy of this death certificate to do that. You want to keep records of the accounts that you've closed and inform the executor of any outstanding balances on the cards. It's also important to terminate insurance policies. You'll want to contact the providers to end coverage for the deceased on home, auto, and health insurance policies. And you'll want to ask that any unused premium be returned. You'll also want to delete or memorialize social media accounts. You'll also want to delete Facebook or Instagram accounts, but some survivors choose to turn them into a memorial for their loved ones instead. A memorialized Facebook profile stays up with the word, quote, remembering, unquote, in front of the deceased person's name. Friends will be able to post on the timeline. Whether you choose to delete or memorialize, you'll need to contact the company with copies of your ID as well as the death certificate. You'll want to close email accounts to prevent identity theft and fraud. It's a good idea to shut down the deceased email account. If the person set up a funeral plan or a will, he or she may have included login information so that you can do this yourself. If not, you'll need copies of the death certificate to cancel an email account. The specifics vary by company, but most require a death certificate and verification that you are the kin or the executor. Also, within that 2-week period after death, you'll want to notify the following persons and entities of your loved one's death. the Social Security Administration. If the deceased was receiving Social Security benefits, you need to stop the checks. Some family members may be eligible for death benefits from Social Security. Generally, funeral directors report deaths to the Social Security Administration. But ultimately, it's the survivor's responsibility to tell the Social Security Administration. Contact your local Social Security office to do so. The agency will let Medicaid know that your loved one has died. You'll want to contact insurance companies. You'll need a death certificate and policy numbers to make claims on any policy the deceased may have had. You'll want to contact banks and other financial institutions. If your loved one left a list of accounts and online passwords, it will be much easier to close or change accounts. If the person didn't, you'll need a copy of the death certificate. If there were financial advisors or stockbrokers involved, you'll want to determine the beneficiaries listed on accounts. Depending on the type of asset, the beneficiary may get access to the account or benefit simply by filling out appropriate forms and providing a copy of the death certificate. With regard to credit agencies, you'll want to make sure that you prevent identity theft. So you'll want to send copies of the death certificate to the three major firms, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. Now, there are reasons why people hire attorneys to handle their trust administrations or probate case matters. One, experience matters. Hiring an experienced attorney will accelerate the administration process and timeline. Two, hiring an attorney will remove stress and uncertainty from the equation. The attorney will be well versed in the laws, rules, and regulations that accompany the administration process. Next, the attorney will also handle many of the time-consuming and confusing responsibilities associated with your being a trustee or probate administrator or executor, thereby relieving you of most of the burdens associated with the role. An attorney can help you properly manage the assets of your loved one to minimize the potential for complaints or lawsuits brought about by unhappy beneficiaries or creditors. An experienced attorney can advise you to ensure that any administrative, legal, or tax-related obligations are handled properly. Because many of these issues are under strict timelines, you must act quickly. So, the point is that you want to make sure that you get on top of these matters right away. And if you're having difficulties dealing with these things emotionally, the better move might be for you to get that to someone who can handle it for you. Obviously, I'm an attorney, and I've dealt with many of these, hundreds of these cases, and I pretty much know the process. And if you have any need of assistance, then you feel free to call our office. We would be happy to answer your questions if you are a probate administrator or executor or the trustee of a trust. And we will help you to decide on the next steps that you need to take in the process. You don't have to handle these tasks alone. So feel free to give our office a call and set up for a free consultation if you are the trustee of a trust or the administrator or executor of a probate estate. Thank you very much for joining us.